not only am I very pleased to have a personal friend and a great educator in his own right, Dr. Panetta, on today, sort of hosting this, bow tie and all has already been pointed out. He's gonna, I think, really make sure this thing hangs together. So we'll work with him to be flexible. But our first speaker today is Dr. Wilson, and I'm gonna let Dr. Panetta, as we affectionately know him, Dr. P here, sort of talk about your resume. But I will say this, that in my brief interactions with you, which I've had a few, I have come away with not only an impressive resume, which is always great, but an impressive person. And I enjoy talking with you and getting to know you and collaborating already the way we have. So, you know, it's sometimes the resume, although terrific, you don't really get the sense of what a great person is unless you meet them too. And it's been my pleasure to begin to get to know you and work with you at the fabulous institution that UTEP is. And I'm certain will continue to be, if not even better, going forward under your leadership. And today is a really important day for us, because I think that I was just watching historic job losses never seen before in our country's history. And we sometimes forget these things. And as we're sort of sitting forward and thinking about the major shifts in how we operate as businesses and as leaders of businesses, who everybody on this call is, it's worth thinking about what the new normal means and how do we sort of handle it. And I do think that education is going to be a cornerstone for what new normal is going to be. And I'll explain why I say that in a second. But let me just illustrate it at this level for the group for a moment, is that as an example, we live on the border with the 15th largest economy on the planet. Trade is what we are about as a community in many, many ways. Nearshoring, however, and the pressure to nearshore and how we are going to operate is enormous. In the past, for example, when we set up supply chains, it was all about efficiency. Those days are gone. Now it's about resilience. Now, efficiency will not disappear, but resilience is now front and center. For example, if the Mexican government declares defense industries operating in Mexico is non-essential, how is the US government going to react to that? So in other words, critical defense industries that are open and operating in Mexico, if they are declared non-essential and therefore shut down, they can no longer supply the US defense industry. That isn't just Mexico, that could be Canada, that could be China, anywhere else. But all I'm trying to say is this is a time of unprecedented change. And we have seen nearshoring become a big issue, and it will be a bigger issue. So how are we going to address these pressures to be not only, let's say, efficient, but resilient? And how is resilient going to be defined? And how is competition going to be defined under those things? And I think this is where education, I come to that point, becomes absolutely critical. We've seen trends before of, you know, things like AI and artificial intelligence and automation were going to shift already the way we define education. And I was looking at a McKinsey report from 2017 in my preparation for today's comments, and they were saying by 2030, which is sort of a magical date for the chamber because we're trying to force people to think 10 years in advance, right? But they were saying that right before the pandemic hit, 14% of the global workforce was not ready for 2030. They were not ready with the skills necessary to be effective. And so reskilling is something that I think is an absolute major discussion point. And when we're looking at resilience and we're looking at issues like this, and how are we going to deal with the new normal, reskilling is going to be a bigger issue than it's ever been before. Because all the touch points that we had before, and even the issues we knew that were accelerating things around reskilling and education have just gotten more profound and more important. I mean, for example, did any of us ever use Zoom a month ago? Not really. Now I live here. This is my home. It used to be a flight. I used to feel like a seat number on an airplane was where I lived most of the time. Now I live on a Zoom address. And I think we all do to some levels. And you know, anybody on your team who can help you figure out how to use Zoom has got new importance, right? This just highlights the issues I think that we're going to be dealing with. And so as we seek to help our members of this group think about these challenges that companies are going to have to address. And when we try to think about how we're going to look at talent management, talent strategies going forward, this is going to be critical. And I think that's why today, for example, when I look at the roster of people we have speaking, and starting off with, obviously with Dr. Wilson, this is going to be a very rich day for you as leaders of companies to be thinking about how do you define that new normal, speaking with the experts who are on the phone or on this Zoom call, I should say, to help us sort of define some of that. So please text, please chat, please ask questions, because I think today education has never been more important, and that's hard. That's a big thing to say because it's always been very important. And with that, what I would like to do is I'll stop talking and we'll turn this over to the chat, but also to the very capable hands of Dr. Panetta. So please, over to you, my friend.
Thank you. Well, good morning, leadership friends. It's been quite a while since we've had a chance to chat last, and it's good to see all of you. We have got a pretty full agenda, and after we get done with Dr. Wilson, I'm going to take a little bit of time to go through another leadership exercise and use that as a way to do some sense checking and just see how you all are doing. But this is a unique position to be able to introduce your boss in a setting like this. And so the pressure is high, I mean, as it might always do, which is partly why I've got a bow tie on. But it is a distinctive pleasure to be able to do this. Dr. Wilson is in her first year at the university, probably the most unforgettable year of her life as things have turned out. Dr. Wilson came to UTEP, as many of you know, after serving as Secretary of the Air Force, and before that as President of the South Dakota School of Mines and Technology in Rapid City, South Dakota. Previous to that, Dr. Wilson had served in the Congress representing New Mexico for 10 years. She brings to the table experience in the private sector, including working with a variety of different defense and science industries, and also as the president or previous president of a company that she helped form, Keystone International. I'll say this, and then I think the way that we'll work through this, ma'am, is to give you some time on the floor. There probably will be some questions. I have a series of questions if you want to have a back and forth, but we'll leave it up to the leadership folks to dive in. But the last thing that I wanted to say is that these transitions for an institution like UTEP are oftentimes challenging just on the basic merits of switching leadership. And I think that that's especially true when you come in after a long-standing leader. And then on top of that, you add in a global pandemic, which is in nobody's job description, quite frankly. And despite that, in fact, that's the situation that Dr. Wilson has found herself in. I will say this as a member of the faculty and somebody who watches communication very, very closely. I will say that over the course of the last several weeks, as the pandemic has started and as it's had a seismic impact on the university and the community, Dr. Wilson has had a steady hand on the helm of the institution. And I think that in itself is remarkable. I think that's a reason to feature her and to have her talk a little bit about education and leadership. But I would add one thing that I think is important, and that is that in moments like this, the way that you really understand somebody's ability and their worth is by the level of grace and moxie that they show. And the president has done that over the course of the last several weeks. I know that she's made the lives of our students tremendously more at ease and has done a very, very strong job making sure that the faculty and the staff are leading the mission of the institution. I think that's really important because we oftentimes lose sight of the fact that individuals are important when in fact it's these institutions that we have to keep moving. And the president has done an excellent job. So with that, Dr. Wilson, I will turn it over to you, and we can kind of move as you see fit.
Well, what Dr. Panetta really knows is that I'm kind of a marshmallow, so he didn't even have to wear his bow tie. And thanks for the kind words. It is true that when I thought about, whenever you go into a new role, you think about, okay, what are the things that I have to do in the first 30, 60, 90 days? What are the major risks and problems and challenges I have to deal with? And I have to say, pandemic was not on the list. So, so one of the things as leaders, particularly as young leaders, to think about and reflect on, maybe when you're, no matter what your current role, as what you're learning about this experience by living through this pandemic and leading your own organizations through this pandemic, is how to deal with the unanticipated as a leader. What are the skills and abilities you have to develop in order to demonstrate at a time of trouble what your organization and your people need from you? And those are completely different skills from administrative skills or finance skills and so on. We can talk about that a little bit, but I think one of the underappreciated skills of leaders is actually agility. And we always, as leaders, particularly as managers, as we've come up as managers in institutions, and many of you may find yourself in a managerial position now, you think about your systems, your processes, your results, your metrics. Those things are repeating patterns. A crisis demands that you look for new patterns and that you're sensitive to what's going on around you and much more agile than you normally have to be. And I tried to explain a little bit what I was thinking about with some of our team internally, because it is, most administrators in universities are about systems. It's about, you recruit students, you educate them, they go through this pathway, you steward them and help them develop, and then they graduate. If you're an administrator, you have this annual budget cycle, everybody gets their monthly report, you put in your timesheets. It's all very cyclical and rhythmic. And then all of a sudden it's not. People who have spent their lives working in standard patterns often have difficulty adjusting when things are very different and developing that ability. And sometimes you may develop it outside of your professional life. So I'm going to ask you to, I can see at least 6 or 7 of you here, in addition to David and Richard. Give me a hand wave if any of you were athletes. In high school or middle school, doesn't matter. Anybody a soccer player, basketball player, tennis? I think athletics probably helps you as leaders to understand a little more of what I mean. And even those of you who just like watching it, watch a soccer game and watch somebody run down the field, make an instantaneous judgment of whether to tap left or tap right, based on the circumstances that are very dynamic. That's not systematic, that's the demonstration of agility. And I think in a crisis, and even sometimes not in a crisis, all of you are dealing with competitors who are trying to take your market share or those kind of things. Understanding what's going on around you and staying on your toes and able to move is probably one of the most underappreciated skills that leaders have to develop. And that's all I'll say to start with, Richard, so we can get a little more interactive here.
So I wanted to start with a question, and then I think leadership class, if you all use the chat function, we can get some questions in addition to some of the things that I wanted to bring to the table. But the first question, ma'am, is in your experience, in the life experience you've had, what and where did you draw the leadership lessons that you have that you've put into play? I mean, you talk about watching sports and your own experience, but what are the quintessential places that those leadership lessons that you're living out now have come from?
Most good judgment comes from experience where you had poor judgment. So like everybody else, I'm kind of, I've gone through a lot of different circumstances in my life and learned from those experiences, and sometimes learned from watching other people, and you look at something and you go, wow, that didn't turn out so well. What could I do differently if I were in that? And being conscious about what I'm learning and the lessons that I'm learning. So so I've had a lot of different experiences in life, and I think I've taken something away from each of those. Everything from running the child welfare department in the state of New Mexico, which was all of the abused and neglected kids, all of the juvenile delinquents, all of the mentally ill kids. So that was, there's going to be a disaster every day. There's going to be a crisis every day. And it was a large organization of 2,000 employees spread over the fifth largest state in the nation geographically. So I learned a lot about managing very difficult, complex situations. And I've run a university before. I was a member of Congress during 9/11. So there's a lot of different experiences, and of course started out my career as an Air Force officer, as a planner in Europe during the Cold War. And so I think maybe I'd explain it this way, and I think it's the same for each of you. When I was a kid, just to tell a story, my dad was a pilot. He was also a mechanic. And we lived in this little house on the end of this road out, we were far away from town, and town was only about 1,000 people. Most of you are too young to remember this, but there used to be traveling salesmen. And there was this guy who sold Snap-on tools. And he would come about every month or so, and he had this red truck. It was the Snap-on tools guy. And we all knew as kids, when the Snap-on guy came, stay away. This is like Christmas for my dad. And so he'd be out there leaning against the truck, laughing with the Snap-on tools guy. And eventually he'd pull out his wallet and he'd buy some tool from this guy, and he'd take it and he'd go and he'd put it in his toolbox in the garage. He probably didn't need that tool that day. Certainly got out a lot of joy out of talking to the Snap-on tools guy. I can remember him laughing. And they probably didn't want us kids close because they were probably telling, randy jokes or something. But one of the things I learned from my dad was to gather tools. You may not need that tool today, but you're going to face problems along the way that require different tools. And so just keep gathering tools, and enjoy the guy and the people around you that are convincing you to maybe pick up this one. So Snap-on tools guy. I collect tools.
So as you think about your trajectory at this particular point, but going back to your time even at the Air Force Academy, how did you make adjustments in your trajectory, and was that a function of timing and circumstance, or did you have an active thought? I mean, in the military is a good sort of frame of reference. Moving up through rank requires certain standards and requires a calendar and requires a certain time. But as you've moved through your life, how do you make those decisions? And what's the calculus that says, okay, this is the thing that I want, and I'm going to go after this now? How did you figure that out, and how do you figure that out?
Well, I think I was most confident of everything I was going to do in life when I was 18, and everything from that point has been a diversion from my planned course. So, if I had done what I thought I was going to do when I was 18, I would have been an experimental test pilot, and and doors opened for me that I didn't even know were there. And that'll happen to all of you. That happens to a lot of us in college. I was the first person in my family to go to college. It was a really big deal. And when somebody who was one of my professors said, hey, you should apply for this scholarship. Yeah. Actually, what he said was the reverse. He said, if you weren't so busy doing all these other things, you could apply for this scholarship. He told me the name of it. I'd never heard of it. But the fact that he told me I couldn't do it caused me to go find out what that was, because I didn't like somebody telling me that I couldn't do something. He probably knew me better than I knew myself at that age. I never, no one in my family had ever been to college. The only people in the town I grew up in that went to graduate school were lawyers and doctors. I didn't know I didn't know why you'd keep going to college. And so there were doors there that opened for me that I didn't even know about, and opportunities that came along the way. And honestly, my goals became wider as I got older, to be a good wife and mother, to make a positive contribution to the community in which I live, and to be a craftsman at my work. You can do that in a lot of different ways. And as decision points have come along in my life, or opportunities have been presented to me, I think about it and I kind of think, all right, is that the way I'm supposed to use my gifts today? And I can intellectualize it all, but at some point, there is just a feeling that this is something I should do, and I do it.
So one of the conversations you and I have had, I found really interesting. So Dr. Wilson is a licensed pilot, and you described the value of flying for you as being this important space in which the only thing that matters is flying the plane, not whatever's going on the ground, not what's happening in your day. And that's a very sort of Zen approach to living your life. So what is the equivalent, you think, of the advice that you would give to a group like this about their equivalency? Like, what's their version of flying the plane?
You'll find your own version. And I would encourage you to do things that are difficult, but that require your full attention. It is so, there's a lot of different practice of mindfulness or something that, and it may be using a sewing machine or just something that requires attention, because by focusing, you're allowing your mind to let go of everything else. And there's actually some really interesting brain science. For those of you who have gone through college and you're really struggling to understand something really hard, and you just can't solve that problem. And then you just, you throw the stuff on the desk and you go for a walk, or you go shoot a basketball, or, clean the living room, and allows your mind to do some dispersed thinking that you're not even conscious of, and you come back and the answer is clear. You go, why didn't I get that before? So allowing yourself to be both focused and then dispersed is actually a really good way to advance your ability to solve all kinds of different problems. I like flying for a lot of different reasons. I grew up in a flying family. It reminds me of my dad. I love the smell of hangars. I also really like to see the world from a very different perspective. If you walk through the pecan orchards just between here and Las Cruces, and you're looking up, you see the trees, and they're beautiful. They're beautiful in another way if you're looking at them from above. And it changes your perspective on things. I went flying last weekend up to Truth or Consequences and back down the river. The striations of the land are just so beautiful as you go past Hatch. It's just, and you don't see it the same way. So do things that tweak your perspective, I guess, is my advice.
Good. And a quick reminder to the class, we have the chat window open. So if you've got a particular question for Dr. Wilson, please put it in there, and I can repeat it for. Let me change gears just a little bit, ma'am, and ask you, since today is the sort of education day for Leadership El Paso, we obviously are in an unprecedented moment in terms of what education looks like, and things have sort of been turned upside down. But given that, and also given your long-range strategic thoughts about education, where do you see the role of an institution like UTEP in this next shortened period of time? So not a 5 or 10 year outlook, but a 3-year or maybe even shorter outlook.
Yeah. First of all, we'll be back in the fall. The question isn't whether, it's how. And I think all of us are figuring out a new how for the duration of this disease before they find a vaccine for it. But I think what it has caused all of us to do is to realize that what we saw as an accelerating pace of change is going to be even faster, and that education is going to be vital for the regions of the world who choose to educate their people will thrive in the 21st century, and those that don't are going to be left behind. And it's not just a one-shot thing anymore. It's going to have to take place in a spiraling way throughout your lives, because the pace of change is accelerating. And there's a lot of ways to think about that. I mean, think about what your parents do and how their profession has changed over the course of their lives. And then think about how much has changed in that same profession just in the last 10 years. You're going to have to adapt to change a lot more than your parents' generation. And as a result of that, you're going to have to constantly be reskilling and upskilling. It has to be just a part of the way in which you do your work. And that means, as educators, we have to be part of the solution to that in making it easier and just more routine for alumni and for others to stay engaged with the institution so that they can constantly be reskilling and upskilling.
This is a class that has quite a few folks from the university that have undergraduate degrees, in some cases master's degrees. And I think the last answer that you gave, I think, gives some credence to this question of what can people do that have that experience or that affinity for the university? I mean, it's easy to say money and contributions, but we're at a unique time. And I'm wondering, now that you've had some time on the ground, how you see the role of alumni and an organization like Leadership El Paso playing into what the university does in the next several years.
One of the things that we're doing, and we'll be rolling this out over the next 6 months, is we're shifting the Alumni Association from a membership, $40 a year, where there are about 2,000 people who are really engaged and everybody else just kind of, to a once a minor, always a minor. And there is value in the network itself. So as alumni, if you're a nursing school alumni, staying connected to that group of people throughout your life and career is going to be a lot more of what we're going to try to do. So it may be for professional conferences. It may be that you're ready to move to your next job. It may be that there's a special professional development course. Most professions now require some form of continuing education. Well, our alumni are the best network, not only to receive education, but to give education. It's not necessarily a faculty member who is the best person to do the next continuing education hour on new methods of disinfection of N95 masks or whatever the training is today. It is our alumni. So the value of the network, and there's so many tools now to stay connected to each other. We do it much more now than David or you or I did when we were in the early parts of our career.
We've got a question from the class, and the question is, what are the challenges that you have faced or face as a female leader, and how do you strategize along those lines in terms of reaction response, and then also even thinking about what that would mean for leaders, female especially, that would be following you or would look to you for that kind of guidance? Yeah. I think early in my career, there were more barriers than there seem to be now. And there were a lot of firsts along the way. I do think that there is an obligation for mid-level and senior level leaders to always make sure, not just for women, but for other underrepresented groups. I think it's actually even more important for minorities now, and particularly in groups where women are still underrepresented. Engineering is a good example, that there is not just a seat at the table, but an invitation to be at the table, and an assistance and often there aren't too many occasions now where I'm in a group where people aren't respectful. But there have been some.
I remember one meeting at the Pentagon where I was the only woman in the room, and there was a guy who was kind of a jerk, who, whenever I said anything, would try to talk over me. And I'm the Secretary of the Air Force. I'm the fourth ranking person in the building, and this guy was, not. And 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 I let him do it a couple of times. And then he's, about the fourth time, and everybody else in the room is noticing this as well, which was actually kind of amusing. And, and he did it about the fourth or fifth time, and I just smiled and kept on talking. And it's like, I gave you 3 shots. So there are, but I think everybody else in the room, several of them women, also noticed that and thought, serve the guy right. I mean, just at some point you have to, as a leader, you have to both role model, and sometimes you have to intervene and take somebody aside and say, dude, we don't do that here. That's not the way. That's not the way it happens. And I saw some good examples of that when I was the junior person. One very memorable moment with a guy who's a Lieutenant Colonel, Chris Pink was his name. He actually lives in New Mexico now. He sent me an email recently. We were stationed at RAF Mildenhall in England, and a young captain, so somebody who's 4 or 5 years out of college, came into our office and told a joke that he had heard downstairs. It was an off-color joke with a racial overtone. Several people in the office kind of laughed. Chris Pink, Anglo guy, senior guy in the office, didn't laugh. But he smiled and he said, Mike, we don't tell jokes like that here. He left, and then the next day he came back and apologized to everybody. Said I shouldn't have done that. That changed his career as a leader because somebody chose to say, we don't do that here. Somebody from the majority group said, we don't do that here. So sometimes you have to be the one that sets, if you say, here's the standard, and you walk by something or you look the other way when somebody does something that's not the standard, you've just set a new standard as a leader if you walk by.
Another question out of the group was talking a little bit about the way in which their organization is going to change radically, just even in terms of the physicality of the organization. And the question that they pose to you is, how will UTEP change in terms of landscape, both the physicality and, I mean, obviously we know with distance education that there's going to be some shifts, but even what a classroom looks like. I mean, where do you see the next couple of months taking us?
Well, we'll probably have fewer people in spaces, and we'll do all of the things that everybody's really talking about, of trying to make sure that you don't have too many people in a confined space, and we'll probably do more kind of blended classes where, for example, half the class comes on Monday and the other half comes on Wednesday, and some of it's by distance and some of it's in person. But I have to say, one of the things I think all of us have learned over the last 45 days, even those of us who are introverts, and despite the fact that I'm an executive leader, I'm actually, if you did a Myers-Briggs, I'm on the introvert end of the scale. So one of the things we've all learned, though, is that we're very social beings, and we substitute things like what we're doing right now for being together. But there is real advantage to people engaging with each other when they're trying to learn. And I think that's been reinforced through this experience. At the same time, and Richard, you may have seen this as a professor, there are some students who feel that they can be themselves more if they write as opposed to speaking. And they may actually be participating more or more thoroughly in a discussion online than they do if they're sitting face to face in a classroom. And I think we've learned about the diversity of our students and how we need to meet their needs in different ways.
We have another question from the group, and this one I think is also unique. And so for those of you in the class that don't know this, Dr. Wilson's daughter just graduated from college and is in her first sort of post-college year. The question that was posed from somebody in the group is from a parent perspective, Dr. Wilson. And the question essentially is, at this particular moment, what is the advice that you would give an incoming undergraduate, given not only the change that we're facing, but also just the pressure of a different world than let's say when that parent went to college or other people that might be in their family group?
Even for those who really are drawn to the liberal arts, try to develop some technical skills, because the technical aspect of work. So, for example, if you're majoring in a liberal art, get a certificate in data science, because that will make you more valuable to potential employers, or able to start or a minor in business, even if you choose to major in political science. So most of the problems of the 21st century are going to be interdisciplinary, complex problems. So the ability to at least be conversant in more than one field, I think, is going to be important. The second thing I would say is internships really matter. In fact, I had this, so I went to my chiropractor this morning. Chiropractors are open, which is great for me. I went to my his daughter is going into her freshman year, and we were talking about it. And I said, look, if she can manage it after her freshman year, do an internship, or even during, 5 hours a week during her freshman year, because even if she can afford to do an unpaid internship, it gives you the work experience to go for that paid internship. And by the time she graduates from college, she will not only have a very good, solid degree, but she will have had experience in the world of work, and have developed the ability to solve problems and work with teams and communicate with others and know that a shirt has a collar and how her alarm clock works. Those things are important life skills that you get from being out there and in the world of work. And internships can give that. And we're actually going to double down on our internships and our engaged learning experiences at UTEP. We're a Carnegie R1 research university. We're also a community engaged scholarship school, one of the few in the country. And we're going to double down on that. And try to make more internships available by working with the business community, and get graduates to have more real world experience to help them on into their careers.
We're going to have a question from the group, and this one tied specifically to engineering, but I think probably some ground to hear your perspective more broadly, which is, the community has long faced this challenge of brain drain. The students that we produce leave the county and in some cases come back, but very often leave and then don't come back. If the university is to play a bigger role both in education, in particular with engineering or with the science fields, what is the role of the university for entrepreneurism, and also what is your sense of the things that might be missing, or the things that this wave of leaders, for example, might be able to take back to organizations to say, look, this is the piece that we might be missing, and here's how we can help?
I actually think we don't do entrepreneurship very well at UTEP. And it's, there are some things that we have that are little elements, but nowhere near as much entrepreneurial activity around the campus as we should have for a university of our size. And in both the curricular and the co-curricular elements of that. And honestly, I think the co-curricular are probably more important. The business plan competitions and the startup labs and the connections to the business community. But it's not just entrepreneurship, because all of you, when you go back to your work full-time, not from home, you're going to be in organizations that are going to have to think about new markets, new products, new ways of communicating with your customers. And and uh, and completely new ways of thinking about things because your customers and markets will have changed. Those skills of thinking about those things and examining those things and looking at new business models, you're going to have to do that in the companies you're in, not just companies you may start. So I think those skills are really important, not just for our students, but for kind of upskilling within the community to cope with very rapid change. And we'll try to be part of that answer, but I'll be very honest with you, I don't think we're really good at it. I've seen communities that are good at it, and I don't think we're there yet. I think maybe that's something we need to deal with the business community on. And which gets back to that, on the brain drain part, we need to connect better with the business community and the potential employers, because I think just because a kid grows up here in El Paso doesn't mean that they know what opportunities and businesses there are here in El Paso where they might find something really satisfying for them. We have pretty much every Fortune 100 or a lot of the Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 companies recruit at UTEP. It is one of the most diverse institutions in the country, great work ethic, all kinds of wonderful things. We have fairly large organizations here in El Paso that don't recruit at UTEP. Well, about the brain drain unless you're at the career fair. We need to deepen those connections with our business community here so that students know they have the chance to stay here and have a great job in a community they love.
We've got a sort of a short window before we let you go, and there's a couple of questions back to the list that I generated. I mean, you've been in town for a year. It's been a whirlwind, not only just in acculturating to the campus, to the community, but to this part of Texas. And even though you have roots in New Mexico, I mean, it is across that state line is a world totally different, right?
Yeah.
So what are the impressions about the community? I mean, what has really struck you in the time that you've been in El Paso?
Very friendly and welcoming community, very family-oriented community. I've adjusted to the rocks rather than adobes. That was like a big architectural change for me. But I think one of the things that's interesting to me about El Paso, and that I think is a unique strength that we should and are and can continue to build on. This is really the only binational, bicultural city in America, in a way that, yeah, New York is a multicultural city. LA is a multicultural city. It's not binational in the same way. And the other fascinating thing to me about El Paso is that, so we're in this city of 2.2 million people in 2 different countries. On the Juarez side of the border, 90% of the people are monolingual Spanish. On the El Paso side of the border, 80% of those people are bilingual English and Spanish, which means the common language here is Spanish, not English, which is fascinating to me for an American city and a tremendous strength to build upon. And so I think that this binational, bicultural city gives us a unique strength, and both economically and tourism and all kinds of other things, we need to build on that.
We have taken a reasonable amount of your time on a busy Friday, and the class and the chamber are certainly grateful for your participation. And we hope that the pandemic doesn't make life totally challenging over the course of the next several weeks. But thank you so much for your participation this morning, ma'am. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Richard. I appreciate it. David, thank you, and thanks to the class. I hope it feels a little geeky. I hope this was okay, and I appreciate your doing this and making do.
Thank
Take
you.
care.